on the wing without failure. No other airline had achieved that. That's an amazing success story. So engine failures happen. They happen to every airline around the world, but they happen a lot less on Qantas. In fact, they're less than half likely to have an engine failure on a twin engine with Qantas than you are on another airline around the world. That's how successful we are with our maintenance of those vehicles. I might ask Bruce to talk about the implications to regional Australia on this.
Yeah, I mean, Senator, if I use the example in Darwin, and we were talking about some of these statistics before, and I think that's probably the most relevant. We've set up a business in Darwin which is quite unique. We've got an international hub that operates in Darwin, and we have a number of aircraft and a large employee base based in Darwin that support that operation. And they run from, and the way we've been able to build that significant hub in Darwin is by operating services through from other points in Australia through Darwin to a number of points in Asia. And it is our most marginal of the domestic ports, so it's the one that's the most marginal in terms of profitability. So it's the toughest one to make work, Darwin. Because it is a tough operating environment. Getting international services to work out of Darwin is tough because they're not thick routes, they're quite marginal. Most of our competitors have pulled out of Darwin. We're one of the few carriers that are still servicing Darwin, and we use the tag flights and the international feed to support those international flights out of Darwin, and that's helped obviously the Darwin tourism industry. It helps with some of the mining and mineral boom that's going on there as well, that people can get directly into Darwin from some of those international destinations. But if we were to, for instance, cabin crew, if our cabin crew costs were to double in Darwin, the viability of those services just wouldn't be there. We'd have to pull a number of services. We're already pulling some of the services and constantly tweaking the Darwin network, and we're going to need to do more just to continue to make it work with the current cost imposts that we have on our business in Darwin. But if you double the cost of cabin crew in Darwin, and we talked about the numbers before, I don't know the exact number, but I think it's somewhere around 10%. You double that cost base and that will put us so far underwater that we'd have to pull about half the Darwin flying. And that would have a serious impact not only on Darwin but on Cairns and on all of the tourism industry that rely on those services to feed passengers into Darwin.
And at the same time, like for instance Thai Airlines, who camp at the Boulevard where I camp in Sydney, they would eat your trade.
Exactly, yeah, we're competing with carriers that are flying directly over the top, and we're trying to get to the Darwin proposition. We also compete directly with those carriers. In fact, a lot of those carriers also do tag flights in Australia as well, and they're not subject obviously to Australian terms and conditions or wages. So we're competing with them on a number of different dimensions. Darwin is one of them. We're competing directly with them. We're competing in intra-Asian markets with them. And as you point out, the labour rates are considerably different. And also the other imposts. A lot of these get, they get government debt sponsorship, so they can access sovereign debt rates. They get significant support in terms of depreciation rates. They're not subject to things like payroll taxes and other obligations, which all add up to considerable burdens when you've got a large labour force that you're employing in this country.
Do you have any idea of what, the mid-shot? This is a serious problem for Australia, as is the bloody dollar for farmers. I mean, the price of wheat now is, I won't say what it is because I'll get pulled into gear, but it's no good. What's the average, just say Philippine Airlines, what would the average mid-shot for a pilot be there? You say our mid-shot and top is $500,000 a flying hour. Have you got any idea what you're competing against in terms of dollars an hour? Doesn't matter. I guess it's a bit out of...
I'm going to give you some examples on cabin crew and pilots. A lot of the competitors we compete with in Asia for cabin crew, the standard salaries that we see in the more developed Asian economies, let me say that because there's some economies like Vietnam, China and Cambodia where the salaries are significantly lower. For the more developed ones, you're paying cabin crew getting around $1,000 a month. That tends to be a typical sort of salary or around that sort of level. We tend to pay our salaries, even for our offshore cabin crew, is around $2,000 a month, and our onshore cabin crew around $5,000 or $6,000 a month. So there's a significant difference just in cabin crew alone. In tech crew, in a lot of the more developed economies, there is a global market for pilots, and it tends to be, for instance, for a captain, around the $200,000 US mark. There are significant differentials in some of the less developed places like Malaysia, Vietnam, China, where the salaries for captains can be as low as $50,000 or $60,000 a year.
But my point on that is, that's in US dollars.
Yes.
I mean, we've appreciated 50% against the US dollar in recent years.
And a lot of these rates at the global level are set at in
This
US
fails
dollars.
to recognise any of those challenges.
God help us. Just on that, just to clarify, are any of your competitors paying more, to your knowledge, for the pilots, or equivalent to?
Off the top of my head, Senator, I don't believe there's any competitors paying more. If you relate everything back to US dollars, certainly not. There was, I know the stats when it comes to British Airways because we do a joint venture with British Airways. Before, if you go back to 2004, our pilots were being paid more than British Airways per unit cost. Today, it's actually turned the other way. Two-thirds of the movement is because of the currency rate, where our pilots now are paid a lot higher than British Airways, and one-third is because British Airways have gotten efficiencies which we haven't. But we are significantly higher than that, and British Airways used to have the highest pilots in the world.
Thanks. And sorry to interrupt you, Senator, if I can just while I'm on that, but you have had a turnover of pilots recently, haven't you? You've had there's been quite a substantial number gone off on sick leave, or?
No, it's leave without pay. The attrition rate, the actual resignation rates of pilots is extremely low. It's actually 1% or less. Pilots typically stick with the airline that they join, and I think that's the same for Jetstar as it is for Qantas. What we have done is, because we did have surplus pilot numbers as a result of us scaling back our UK operations from the 4 to 2 services per week, and scaling back some of the other services internationally. So we had a surplus of, I think, around 150 pilots. So we didn't want to make redundancies because, as I said, we do want to turn the international business around so we can start growing again. So we offered the pilots leave without pay to work for other airlines. Some of the pilots went to Jetstar with the growth that Jetstar has experienced not only in Asia on Jetstar terms and conditions, and they've taken a 3-year leave of absence on which they can come back to Qantas. Some have gone to...
Or you can make them redundant.
No, 3 years there, because they may not be the pilots that it's a last in, first out system. So some of those pilots could be way up to seniority. So when they come back, depending on where they are in the seniority, they may have a job, and then we'd have to revisit whether the international business has recovered sufficiently enough and whether there is redundancies. But to give an example of how we're planning for this, Senator, as an example, in London, we had those 4 services. Heathrow slots are very valuable. We have kept the 2 slots in Heathrow that were released in April. BA are using them.
Even though you're not using them?
Yeah, BA are using them for 3 years, and they're paying us money for the slots. So we actually make money out of it, and in 3 years' time we get a slot back. So hopefully we can turn the international business around so we can reclaim those slots, put the flying back into London, and take those pilots back into the Qantas operation.
And it may assist the committee, Senator, I've just demoted you again, sorry, Mr. Joyce, if you do provide numbers around those pilots that you have got off. Sure. For the benefit of the committee to weigh up there.
Senator, I might answer a few more questions while we're here at the moment. For Senator Xenophon, we've clarified that fuel costs are not included in the Jet Connect numbers. It is a wet lease arrangement, so the aircraft variable costs do include the aircraft ownership costs and the lease of those aircraft, but do not include fuel costs. We cover...
Sorry, further to that, Mr. Joyce, thank you for that answer, but where it says aircraft operating variable, because I think when you first looked at it, you thought, well, it seems like fuel to me. That was a reasonable assumption to make, because when you look at in terms of other accounts, aircraft operating variable would include fuel. So it's $23.9 million for 2011, 24.7 in 2010 New Zealand dollars. What is it? What will the cost be?
What would the cost of fuel be?
Yeah, I mean, no. What would the aircraft operating variable expenses be?
It's the maintenance of the aircraft, the ownership of the aircraft. So all of them are done by Jet Connect locally.
Right.
So those costs are allocated back are charged back to Qantas. It's very similar. We have a relationship with Cobham, which is a non-owned entity, where they wet lease aircraft to Qantas, the 717s, to do all of our regional operations. And it's the exact same mechanism that we would have there. We would have we would have the cost of the airline operating costs, which are the cost of maintenance, the cost of the aircraft, the cost of the pilots, and the cost of the cabin crew allocated back. And then Qantas would pay all of the en route charges, the fuel costs, and the landing fees at the airports as part of that operation.
So Qantas pays all the fuel costs?
Airport costs, en route costs, they're all covered by Qantas.
Okay, so that would show up on Qantas's.
Yeah. But this also includes, this is all put back into Qantas's mainline books, so we do consolidate them back in. Right. So there's no pass. We're not saying that JetConnect is making $11 million as a standalone entity that is completely different from Qantas. It is allocated back into the Qantas results because it's part of the Qantas network.
But when you get the revenue, sorry, Chair, I'm just trying to sort this out, and I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm just trying to understand when it says revenue from operating activities of $73.4 million in 2011, New Zealand, and you're saying that the costs, you've got manpower and staff related, $37 million, aircraft operating variable, 23.9, other, 5.3, that's 66 million, and you had some other revenue, so it's $77 million in revenue, $66 million in expenditure, profit before related income tax expense of 11.2 million New Zealand. So fuel's not included in that?
No, it's not.
So if fuel was included in it, you'd be losing money?
Yeah, but...
is that right? I don't want to misunderstand you.
It's not the way it works, Senator. What happens is wet lease provision is a standard process in the aviation industry. We've wet leased aircraft from other entities around the world. And the way, because this is a New Zealand-based company, it is what the service it's providing. It's not operating these routes in its own right. The service it's providing is a wet lease operation. What we mean by wet lease is it provides aircraft with crew to Qantas.
But not fuel?
No, it just provides the aircraft.
Other wet leases include fuel, don't they?
Sorry?
Would other wet lease operations
yes, a normal lease is called a dry lease, which you can get leases which include fuel and other costs associated with them.
But this is a normal wet lease would include fuel?
No, it doesn't.
No?
No. Wet lease, because Cobham is a great example. With Cobham, we get the, it's called aircraft crew maintenance and insurance. It's usually an ACMI rate, aircraft crew maintenance and insurance.
Sure, but not fuel.
And not fuel. And that's the exact business relationship we have with Cobham. And Cobham make a margin out of it. This company is reporting a margin because it has to be at commercial terms. It's reporting a margin for the New Zealand statutory requirements. But when that margin is made, it's reallocated back to Qantas, so the Qantas results show that margin in the Qantas results.
I think the confusing part there, Senator, is the revenue line in those accounts is not the revenue from passengers. It's the revenue that Qantas pays to JetConnect for mounting those services.
For a wet lease. So we actually have a wet lease revenue. It is not allocated the entire revenue on the Trans-Tasman. It's a great point. So it's clearly a cost for providing those services that's charged to Qantas by that entity, and then it's reconciled back at the end of the year.
So JetConnect leases, does JetConnect lease its aircraft? No.
JetConnect gets aircraft, the Qantas Group purchases aircraft and allocates them to the JetConnect business, and the JetConnect business operates those aircraft and charges them back.
So who actually, so all the JetConnect fuel bills for those flights are paid for by Qantas?
Yeah.
What else does it pay? Because
as I said, airport landing charges, en route costs. Overhead sales and distribution costs associated with it, overheads associated with it.
So would you call JetConnect an airline?
JetConnect is an operating entity. We've never said it's a standalone business. No. It's not reported as a standalone business. We don't portray those profits as a standalone business profits. It is an entity that's operating on behalf of Qantas, but for statutory requirements in New Zealand, we do report we have to report a revenue line, which is the charges that it covers to Qantas for operating purposes, and we have to cover its cost line. But this business, when it comes back to reporting overall crew profitability, it's consolidated back into the Qantas segment, and it doesn't cause a distortion on the Qantas numbers.
Okay, so basically the savings you get from it is because you're paying people out of New Zealand at New Zealand rates. Is that a fair summary?
And the aircraft are based in New Zealand.